20 years. That's how long Yvonne Jackson spent building her reputation in Orlando's competitive corporate finance sector. 20 years of early mornings, late nights, and doing everything by the book. But on one Tuesday morning, when her most important client walked away, blaming her for a deal gone wrong, Yvonne felt something crack deep inside her chest. She didn't know yet that the betrayal came from someone she trusted like family. Someone who smiled at her every morning while stabbing her in the back every afternoon. She didn't know that a single swapped file would nearly erase everything she had worked 2 decades to build. But here's what her enemies never anticipated. Yvonne Jackson didn't panic. She prepared. And what happened next? It's a lesson every business owner, every entrepreneur, every professional needs to hear. Because this isn't just about corporate sabotage. This is about what happens when integrity meets intelligence, when patience becomes power, and when the person they underestimated becomes the one they'll never forget. Hello, family. Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into Yvonne's story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been blindsided at work? Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were working against you the entire time? If you have, then you already know that sinking feeling. That moment when the ground disappears beneath your feet and you realize the game was rigged from the start. But here's why Yvonne's story matters to you, especially if you're navigating the business world, managing a company, or building something meaningful in your career. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how Yvonne turned her greatest professional crisis into her most powerful comeback. We're going to see how she used 3 simple principles: documentation, patience, and ethical strategy to expose corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for years. And along the way, you're going to learn why the insurance and compliance safeguards you might be overlooking right now could be the difference between surviving a crisis and being destroyed by one. I'm talking about the kind of financial protection most mid-level professionals ignore until it's too late. Life insurance that protects your family if the worst happens. Disability insurance that safeguards your income when you can't work. Business interruption insurance that keeps your company afloat during unexpected crises. Yvonne understood these things. Her competitors didn't. And that difference changed everything. By the end of this story, you're going to understand why shortcuts always cost more than they save, why ethical planning outlasts every trick in the book, and why sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply refusing to play by their rules. So stick with me. This story moves slowly at first, just like Yvonne's strategy. But trust me, the payoff is worth every minute. And before we begin, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. Your support keeps these stories alive, and every time you click, you're helping us share voices and lessons that need to be heard. Now, let's meet Yvonne Jackson. Yvonne Jackson was 47 years old when her world turned upside down. For 2 decades, she'd been the kind of professional person respected, but rarely celebrated. Quiet, methodical, the type who arrived early and left late, who read every contract twice, who checked her work 3 times before submitting it. She worked as a senior compliance and financial strategy manager at Marshall & Boyd, a mid-sized investment consulting firm in downtown Orlando. The office sat on the 14th floor of a glass building that reflected the Florida sun like a mirror, making everything look brighter than it actually was. Yvonne's job? Making sure her clients' investments were protected, making sure their risk exposure was managed, making sure that when the unexpected happened, and it always did, they had the right safeguards in place to survive it. She believed in preparation, not panic. She believed in insurance as protection, not paranoia. Personally, Yvonne practiced what she preached. She carried life insurance to protect her 16-year-old daughter, Maya, in case anything happened to her. She maintained health insurance that emphasized preventive care because she'd seen too many people waiting until it was too late. And she paid for disability insurance, even though her colleagues called it unnecessary because she understood something they didn't. Your earning power is your most valuable asset, and if you can't work, you can't earn. This wasn't just professional advice for Yvonne. This was survival. Because Yvonne hadn't always been comfortable. She grew up in a small apartment in Jacksonville with a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still struggled to keep the lights on. She put herself through community college, then transferred to the University of Central Florida, working overnight shifts at a hotel to pay tuition. She built her career one careful step at a time. No shortcuts, no corner cutting, no compromises. By the time she reached her late 40s, Yvonne had something rare in the corporate world, a reputation for absolute integrity. Clients trusted her, regulators respected her, even competitors acknowledged her skill, even if they didn't like her for it. But here's the thing about being known for integrity. It makes you a target. Danielle Brooks wasn't Yvonne's biological sister, but she might as well have been. They met 12 years ago when Danielle joined Marshall & Boyd as a junior analyst. Back then, Danielle was hungry, ambitious, and eager to prove herself. She sought out Yvonne as a mentor, and Yvonne saw something of herself in the younger woman. That same determination, that same drive. They bonded over late-night project deadlines and shared frustrations about corporate politics. They celebrated promotions together. They supported each other through personal struggles, Yvonne's daughter's health scare, Danielle's difficult divorce. Over the years, work sisters became the term they used, and Yvonne meant it. She trusted Danielle completely, but what Yvonne didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the quiet resentment growing inside Danielle with every passing year. Because Yvonne's reputation grew, Danielle's stagnated. While clients specifically requested Yvonne by name, Danielle remained in her shadow. While Yvonne earned respect through patience and precision, Danielle grew impatient with how slowly success seemed to come. And impatience in the corporate world makes people vulnerable to bad ideas. The crisis began in March. Yvonne was leading a sensitive portfolio review for Meridian Capital, a longtime institutional client worth $1 million in annual fees to Marshall & Boyd. The portfolio involved complex risk exposure across commercial real estate, and Yvonne's job was to ensure every asset was properly protected. This meant analyzing property insurance valuations for their commercial buildings, reviewing business interruption insurance projections to ensure cash flow during crises, verifying liability insurance documentation for regulatory compliance. It was detailed work, the kind that required absolute accuracy, because one mistake could cost the client millions and cost Marshall & Boyd their reputation. Yvonne worked on the presentation for 6 weeks, building spreadsheets, verifying documents, and cross-referencing policy terms with actual risk exposure. She consulted with actuaries. She spoke with underwriters. She reviewed exclusion clauses line by line to make sure nothing was missing. The night before the presentation, she stayed late in the office, triple-checking everything. Danielle stayed late with her, ordering Thai food, making jokes to lighten the mood. "You're going to nail this tomorrow," Danielle said, smiling across the conference table. Yvonne smiled back. "We're going to nail this. This is our work, not just mine." "Our work," Danielle repeated softly. "Right." Something flickered behind Danielle's eyes, but Yvonne was too tired to notice. At 11:30 p.m., Yvonne finally packed up her laptop and files. She hugged Danielle goodnight and headed home, confident everything was perfect. She didn't know that Danielle stayed behind. She didn't know that Danielle waited 15 minutes, then walked back to the conference room. She didn't know that Danielle logged into the shared drive using credentials she'd memorized months ago. And she didn't know that Danielle opened one critical file, the property insurance valuation analysis, and replaced it with an older, outdated version. A version with inaccurate numbers, missing data, and conclusions that would make Yvonne look careless. The switch took less than 3 minutes. It was subtle, calculated, nearly impossible to catch unless you know exactly what to look for. Danielle saved the file, logged it out, and went home. And the next morning, Yvonne walked into the Meridian Capital presentation with a sabotaged file she didn't know existed. The presentation started well. Yvonne walked the Meridian team through market analysis, risk assessments, and historical trends. Everything was clear, confident, and professional. She could see heads nodding around the table. Then she reached the property insurance section. She pulled up the file on the screen, and within 30 seconds, her stomach dropped. The numbers were wrong, not slightly off, completely wrong. Valuations were outdated by 3 years. Coverage gaps weren't identified. Risk exposure calculations looked like they'd been done by an intern, not a senior manager with 20 years of experience. Yvonne's mind raced. This wasn't her file. This couldn't be her file, but it was her name at the top. The Meridian CFO interrupted. "Ms. Jackson, these property valuations don't match our current portfolio. Are you using outdated data?" Yvonne's throat went dry. "It seems to be an error, if you'll give me just a moment." "An error?" The CFO's voice was cold now. "This is a multi-million-dollar portfolio. We can't base our insurance strategy on errors." Yvonne tried to recover, pulling up backup files, explaining that this wasn't the version she'd prepared. But the damage was done. Trust, once broken in a corporate presentation, doesn't heal in the same meeting. By the time she left the room, she could feel it. The shift. The doubt. 3 days later, Meridian Capital withdrew their business from Marshall & Boyd. In the email sent directly to Yvonne's supervisor, they cited concerns about competency and attention to detail. The words felt like a slap. Within a week, Marshall & Boyd's internal audit team launched a review of Yvonne's work, not just the Meridian presentation. Everything. Every file she'd touched in the past year. Every client interacts. Every recommendation. They placed her under performance observation, which was corporate speak for "we're deciding whether to fire you." Yvonne sat in her office staring at her computer screen, trying to understand what had happened. She'd checked that file a dozen times. She knew the numbers were correct. So how did an outdated version end up in the presentation? She pulled up the file history on the shared drive. Last modified 10:47 p.m., the night before the presentation. Her heart stopped. She left the office at 11:00 p.m. She was the only one there, except Danielle. Yvonne sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. No, it couldn't be. Danielle wouldn't. They were sisters. They trusted each other. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "Are you sure?" Over the next 2 weeks, Yvonne watched carefully. Danielle was supportive in public. "I can't believe this is happening to you," she said during lunch one day, her voice full of sympathy. "Everyone knows you're the best at what you do." But Yvonne noticed small things. How Danielle avoided eye contact when discussing the Meridian file. How she changed the subject whenever Yvonne mentioned checking the file history. How she seemed unusually interested in which files the audit team was reviewing. And then Yvonne overheard something that changed everything. She was working late, again, when she heard voices in the break room. 2 junior analysts gossiping in whispers they thought were private. "Did you hear? Hartman and Cole just picked up the Meridian account." Hartman? That was fast. Yeah, apparently Danielle's been feeding them intel for months. She's got a friend there. Yvonne's blood ran cold. Hartman and Cole was Marshall & Boyd's biggest competitor. And did Danielle have a connection there? Everything clicked into place. The sabotage file. The convenient timing. Meridian switching firms immediately. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. And Danielle wasn't working alone. The weeks after Meridian pulled their business felt like drowning in slow motion. Colleagues who used to greet Yvonne warmly in the hallway now nodded politely and kept walking. Invitations to strategy meetings dried up. Her supervisor stopped CCing her on important emails. Nobody said it directly, but the message was clear. You're a liability now. Danielle, meanwhile, played her role perfectly. She'd stop by Yvonne's office with coffee, asking how she was holding up. She'd defend Yvonne in meetings, saying things like, "Everyone makes mistakes. We should give her a chance to recover." But every kind of word felt like a knife wrapped in silk. Yvonne smiled. thanked her, and said nothing about what she suspected, because she'd learned something important over 20 years in this business. Never show your hand until you're ready to play it. Financial pressure mounted too. With her reputation damaged, Yvonne, worried about losing her job, and if she lost her job, what happened to the life insurance policy protecting Maya? What happened to the health coverage that kept her daughter's asthma manageable? What happened to the disability insurance she'd paid into for years? Late at night, sitting at her kitchen table with bills spread in front of her, Yvonne thought about why she'd chosen those policies in the first place. She chose life insurance because she'd watched her own mother die young with nothing to leave behind except debt. She chose critical illness coverage because her aunt had survived cancer but lost her house paying for treatment. She chose waiver of premium clauses, the provision that keeps your insurance active even if you can't afford premiums during disability, because she understood that dignity during hardship mattered. These weren't abstract financial products to Yvonne. They were lifelines. And now, watching her career crumble, she understood their value more than ever. But more than insurance, Yvonne understood something else. Preparation beats panic every single time. So instead of fighting back publicly, instead of screaming about sabotage or making accusations she couldn't yet prove, Yvonne did something smarter. She started documenting everything. Yvonne didn't have IT access to pull detailed logs from the company's servers, but she didn't need it. She had something better, 20 years of experience understanding how systems worked and where people got sloppy. She started with the file itself. Every document on Marshall and Boyd's shared drive kept a version history, a record of every time someone opened it, modified it, or saved changes. Most people didn't know how to access that data. Yvonne did. She pulled the metadata for the property insurance file, and there it was, modified on the night before the presentation at 10:47 p.m., 33 minutes after Yvonne left the building. But the modification wasn't logged under Yvonne's credentials. It was logged as system administrator, which meant someone had used elevated privileges to make the change without leaving their name. Only 3 people at Marshall and Boyd had admin access: the IT director, the CFO, and Danielle, who'd been granted temporary admin rights 6 months ago during a system migration, rights she was supposed to return. Nobody bothered to revoke the rights. Yvonne's hands shook as she printed the log, but she didn't confront Danielle. Not yet. Instead, she kept digging. Yvonne began reviewing other files she'd worked on with Danielle over the past year: small projects, client proposals, risk assessments. And she found something disturbing. In 3 separate cases, clients who'd initially chosen Marshall and Boyd ended up switching to Hartman and Cole within weeks of receiving their proposals. All 3 were clients Danielle had been involved with. All 3 had cited vague reasons for the switch: better fit, more competitive rates, stronger relationship. Yvonne pulled the proposals and compared them to Hartman and Cole's published marketing materials. The language was nearly identical in places. Not copied, word for word, that would be too obvious, but the strategy, the structure, the risk analysis methodology was all the same. Someone had been feeding Hartman and Cole information from inside Marshall and Boyd, and that someone had access to Yvonne's files. She thought back to all those late nights with Danielle, all those shared documents, all those collaborative projects where Danielle had insisted on having edit access to everything. It wasn't mentorship. It was reconnaissance. Yvonne felt sick, but she kept working. As Yvonne investigated Hartman and Cole, she noticed something interesting. Their proposals were aggressive. They promised higher returns, lower premiums, better coverage, everything a client wanted to hear. But when Yvonne dug into the fine print of their policies, she found problems. Exclusion. Clauses are buried on page 47 that clients probably never read. Renewal clauses that allowed massive premium increases after the first year. Grace period clauses, the time you have to pay an overdue premium before losing coverage, have been shortened to just 15 days instead of the standard 31. Most damaging of all, their business interruption insurance policies had coverage caps so low they'd barely cover 3 months of losses in a real crisis. In other words, Hartman and Cole were selling attractive-looking policies that wouldn't actually protect clients when it mattered most. They were betting that clients wouldn't read the fine print, that they'd chase lower prices without understanding what they were giving up, that by the time the problem surfaced, it would be too late. Yvonne knew this strategy. She'd seen firms try it before. It worked, until it didn't. And when it failed catastrophically. Over the next 6 weeks, Yvonne quietly compiled evidence. She documented the file modification timestamps. She archived emails showing Danielle's access to sensitive documents. She collected examples of Hartman and Cole's proposals that mirrored Marshall and Boyd's confidential strategies. She reviewed client contracts and found 3 cases where Hartman and Cole's policies had already failed their promises. Clients facing unexpected coverage gaps, denied claims, and premium increases that made the policies unsustainable. She even found regulatory complaints filed against Hartman and Cole by smaller clients whose business interruption claims were denied on technicalities. Everything pointed to a pattern. Danielle was feeding information to Hartman and Cole in exchange for some kind of benefit, probably a promised job or commission, and Hartman and Cole were using that information to undercut Marshall and Boyd with aggressive but ultimately flawed proposals. But Yvonne still needed one more piece. Proof of communication between Danielle and Hartman and Cole. That's when she remembered something. 3 months ago, Danielle had mentioned meeting an old friend for coffee, someone who worked in risk management at another firm. At the time, Yvonne thought nothing of it. But now she pulled up Danielle's LinkedIn profile, and there, right in her connections, was James Kellerman, Senior Vice President at Hartman and Cole. They'd worked together years ago at a different company. According to their public interaction history, they'd reconnected around the same time clients started leaving Marshall and Boyd for Hartman. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to establish the relationship. Yvonne sat back in her chair, staring at the evidence spread across her desk. She had enough now, enough to take to her supervisor, enough to expose what had happened. But she didn't, not yet. Because Yvonne understood something about corporate justice. It's not enough to prove someone did something wrong. You have to prove it in a way that makes the company look good for discovering it. And that required perfect timing. While Yvonne built her case, she also started rebuilding her reputation internally. She volunteered to help junior analysts with their projects. She offered to review compliance filings for other managers. She wrote detailed memos on emerging regulatory changes and distributed them to the entire team. Slowly, people started remembering why they'd respected her in the first place. And she did one more thing. She quietly advised a smaller client, one who'd been considering switching to Hartman and Cole, to review the grace period clauses in their proposed policy. The client did, and they discovered that Hartman and Cole's proposal would have left them exposed to a coverage lapse if they were even a day late with a premium payment during a cash flow crisis. They stayed with Marshall and Boyd, and they mentioned Yvonne's careful attention to detail to their contact with the firm. Word traveled. People started asking, maybe we were too quick to judge her? Yvonne didn't defend herself, didn't explain, didn't make excuses. She just kept working, quietly, carefully, ethically. And she waited for the right moment. That moment came in September, when Marshall and Boyd's CFO announced a company-wide compliance audit. Not because of anything Yvonne had done, just routine due diligence before the fiscal year ended. But routine audits have a way of uncovering inconvenient truths, especially when someone makes sure the auditors know exactly where to look. The compliance audit was scheduled to last 3 weeks. Auditors would review file access logs, client communications, proposal accuracy, regulatory compliance across the entire firm. On Monday morning, the audit began. Yvonne submitted a formal request to the audit team. I'd like a comprehensive review of the Meridian Capital file, including version history and user access logs from the night before the presentation. The request was professional, factual, and framed as Yvonne seeking to clear her name. After months of scrutiny, the auditors agreed. 2 days later, they called her in for a meeting. Ms. Jackson, we found some irregularities in the file modification records. Yvonne kept her expression neutral. What kind of irregularities? Someone with administrator credentials accessed and modified the file at 10:47 p.m. on the night before your presentation. But the modification wasn't logged under a specific user account. It was masked as a system-level change. That's unusual, isn't it? Very. We're expanding the audit to include all files accessed with admin privileges over the past 12 months. Yvonne nodded slowly. Whatever helps clarify what happened. The auditor looked at her carefully. Ms. Jackson, if someone deliberately sabotages your work, this audit will find it. Do you have suspicions about who might have done this? Yvonne met his eyes. I trust the audit process to reveal the truth. That's why I requested it. 3 days later, the audit team requested a meeting with Danielle Brooks. Danielle walked into the conference room expecting another routine audit interview. She'd prepared her answers, rehearsed her explanations, and perfected her concerned colleague's tone. What she didn't expect was Yvonne sitting at the table alongside the auditors. Her smile faltered for just a second. Oh, Yvonne, I didn't realize you'd be here. Ms. Brooks, the lead auditor began, we're reviewing file access logs related to the Meridian Capital presentation. Can you tell us where you were on the evening of March 14th between 10 and 11:30 p.m.? Danielle shifted in her seat. That was months ago. I don't remember specifically, probably at home. Our records show you badged out of the building at 11:19 p.m. that night, 29 minutes after a critical file was modified. I must have stayed late to finish something I don't recall. The auditor slid a document across the table. This is the access log for the Meridian file. Someone with administrator credentials modified it that night. You're one of 3 people who had those credentials. Can you explain why you would have accessed that file? I didn't access it. Why would I? That's what we're trying to understand. Yvonne spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but steady. Danielle, when we left the office that night, you were still there. You saw me pack up my files. You knew which version of the document I was planning to present. Danielle's eyes flashed. Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking what happened, because the file I spent 6 weeks preparing was replaced with an outdated version 30 minutes after I left, and the next morning, my biggest client walked away. That's not my fault. Maybe you made a mistake. Yvonne slid another document forward. This is the email thread between you and James Kellerman at Hartman & Cole, recovered from the archived server, dated 2 weeks before the Meridian presentation. Danielle went pale. In it, you discuss upcoming opportunities and clients who might be open to better options. 3 weeks after this email, Meridian signed with Hartman. We're old friends. We were just catching up. Then explain this. Yvonne produced another document. A consulting agreement between you and Hartman & Cole, signed 4 months ago. They've been paying you $5,000 a month as a strategy advisor. The room went silent. Danielle's hands trembled. This is a witch hunt. You're trying to destroy me because you can't admit you failed. Yvonne's voice remained calm. I failed because you made sure I would. You swapped my file, fed information to our competitor, and let me take the blame. And you did it for $5,000 a month. Prove it. Prove I modified that file. The auditor intervened. Ms. Brooks, our IT forensics team recovered deleted logs from the backup server. The admin credentials used to modify the file were traced to your workstation via MAC address. The modification was made from your computer. Danielle stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. I want my lawyer. That's your right, the auditor said calmly. This meeting is concluded. We'll submit our findings to HR and senior leadership within 48 hours. Danielle looked at Yvonne one last time. There was no friendship in her eyes anymore, only bitter resentment. You were always so perfect, Yvonne. Always so ethical. You know what? It made you easy to beat. Yvonne didn't flinch. Danielle, I wasn't trying to beat anyone. I was trying to help people. That's the difference between us. Danielle left without another word. Within 72 hours, the audit report was delivered to Marshall and Boyd's executive committee. The findings were damning. Danielle Brooks had used unauthorized administrator access to modify client files. She had maintained a paid consulting relationship with Hartman and Cole, while employed by Marshall and Boyd, violating conflict of interest policies. She had shared confidential client information with a competitor, exposing the firm to legal liability. Marshall and Boyd terminated Danielle immediately and referred the case to their legal department for potential criminal charges. But the fallout extended beyond Danielle. The audit team expanded their investigation into Hartman and Cole's practices, and what they found shocked the industry. Hartman and Cole had been systematically undercutting competitors by offering policies with hidden flaws, exactly as Yvonne had suspected. Coverage gaps in their business interruption insurance, inadequate liability coverage, property insurance valuations that significantly underestimated replacement costs. Their strategy relied on clients not reading the fine print until it was too late, but several clients had read it, and they'd filed complaints with the state insurance commissioner. Within weeks, Hartman and Cole faced regulatory sanctions. Multiple clients sued for misrepresentation. The firm's reputation collapsed almost overnight. And Meridian Capital? They quietly returned to Marshall and Boyd, requesting Yvonne specifically to rebuild their portfolio. 6 weeks after the audit concluded, Marshall and Boyd's CEO called Yvonne into her office. "Ms. Jackson, I owe you an apology. We should have trusted your work from the beginning. Instead, we let doubt cloud our judgment." Yvonne sat calmly. "I understand the pressure you were under. When a major client walks away, everyone looks for explanations. Still, we failed you, and I want to make it right." The CEO slid a document across the desk. "We're promoting you to Director of Ethics and Compliance. It's a newly created position with expanded authority. You'll oversee all client proposals, audit internal practices, and ensure we never face a situation like this again." Yvonne looked at the document, emotion stirring in her chest. Not triumphing, not vindication, just quiet relief. "I accept," she said. The CEO smiled. "There's one more thing. We'd like you to lead a training initiative across the firm, teach our staff about ethical compliance, proper risk assessment, and—" She paused. "The importance of insurance as real protection, not just product sales. I'd be honored." Over the following months, Yvonne built something remarkable. She developed a training program that didn't just teach technical skills, it taught values. She explained why inflation protection clauses mattered, because inadequate coverage today becomes catastrophic exposure tomorrow. Why transparent risk disclosure builds trust, because clients who understand their policies stay loyal for decades. Why grace period clauses and waivers of premium provisions weren't fine print. They were lifelines during a crisis. Her sessions became the most attended in company history. Junior analysts sought her mentorship. Senior managers requested her input on major deals. And clients? Clients started specifically asking for the Yvonne Jackson approach. Thorough, ethical, built for the long term. 1 year after the Meridian presentation, Yvonne sat in her new office on the 16th floor. Through the window, Orlando spread out beneath her, the same city, the same sun. But everything felt different now. Her daughter Maya knocked on the open door. "Mom, ready for lunch?" Yvonne smiled. Maya was 17 now, preparing for college applications. She wanted to study business ethics. Yvonne couldn't have been prouder. As they walked to the elevator, Maya said, "Mom, can I ask you something? Last year, when everything fell apart, how did you stay so calm?" Yvonne pressed the elevator button, thinking carefully about her answer. "I wasn't calm inside, sweetheart. I was terrified. But I'd learned something important over the years. When people try to destroy you, panic is their weapon. Chaos is their advantage. So I refused to give them that." "But how did you know it would work out?" "I didn't. I just knew that if I stayed true to what I believed in, documentation, patience, ethics, then eventually the truth would surface. It always does." The elevator arrived. As they stepped inside, Maya said, "Danielle made a huge mistake, didn't she?" Yvonne nodded slowly. "She did. But you know what the real tragedy is? She didn't have to. She was talented, smart. If she'd just been patient, worked ethically, and built her reputation honestly, she could have had everything she wanted. Instead, she took a shortcut. And shortcuts always, always cost more than they save." Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be like you when I grow up. Ethical, strong, someone can trust people." Yvonne felt tears prick her eyes. She pulled her daughter close. "Then you already are, baby. You already are." Now, I need you to pause with me for a moment, because Yvonne's story isn't just about corporate sabotage, it's about principles that matter in every aspect of business and life. When Yvonne's world collapsed, she didn't spiral into panic. She didn't make desperate moves or emotional decisions. She prepared. She documented. She built her case, brick by brick. This is the same principle that guides smart financial planning. You don't wait for a crisis to think about life insurance. You don't wait for an illness to wish you'd bought health coverage. You don't wait until you're disabled to understand the value of income protection. You prepare before the storm, so when it hits, you're ready. Danielle thought she was clever. She saw an opportunity to make quick money, boost her career, and get ahead fast. She took the shortcut, and it destroyed her. This happens in business every single day. People cut corners on compliance. They misrepresent products. They hide exclusion clauses. They promise what they can't deliver. And for a while, it works. Until it doesn't. Yvonne succeeded because she refused to compromise her ethics, even when it was hard, even when it took longer, even when nobody was watching. And that's the secret nobody tells you. Ethics aren't expensive. They're an investment. And that investment always pays returns, eventually. Remember how Hartman and Cole sold policies with hidden flaws? Coverage caps too low, grace periods are too short, exclusion clauses buried on page 47. This is why Yvonne always, always reads fine prints. And this is why you must too. When you buy life insurance, understand the policy terms. When you purchase disability coverage, know what total disability actually means in the contract. When you sign business interruption insurance, verify the coverage limits and exclusions. Because the time to discover a gap in your coverage is not when you're filing a claim. Yvonne spent 20 years building her reputation. When it was attacked, she could have walked away. It started somewhere else, given up. But she understood that reputation isn't just what other people think of you. It's what you know about yourself. Danielle destroyed her reputation in 6 months for $30,000. Yvonne rebuilt hers through consistency, integrity, and patience. In business, your reputation is your real currency. Protect it. Invest in it. Never compromise it for quick wins. Yvonne didn't rush to confront Danielle. She didn't make public accusations. She didn't demand immediate justice. She waited. She gathered evidence. She let the system do its work. And when the moment was right, the truth surfaced naturally. This is one of the hardest lessons for driven, ambitious people to learn. Sometimes doing nothing is doing everything. Sometimes waiting is winning. Whether it's in business disputes, investment strategies, or career moves, patience is power. So now I want to ask you some questions, and I really want you to think about this. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted? Have you ever had your reputation attacked because someone saw you as competition instead of a colleague? And most importantly, are you prepared for the unexpected? Do you have the financial safeguards, the life insurance, disability coverage, the business protection that would allow you to survive a crisis with your dignity intact? Because here's what I've learned from Yvonne's story and from dozens of stories like hers. The people who survive crises aren't the ones with the most money or the best connections. They're the ones who prepared before the crisis came. They're the ones who understood that insurance isn't paranoia, it's protection. They're the ones who refused to take shortcuts, even when shortcuts looked tempting. They're the ones who stayed ethical when everyone around them was cutting corners. And they're the ones who understood that your calm response today becomes your authority tomorrow. So I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever faced betrayal in your career or business? How did you handle it? What financial protection do you have in place right now? Are they enough? And what's one lesson from Yvonne's story that resonates with you most? Because here's the thing, we're not just sharing stories here. We're building a community of people who believe in integrity, preparation, and long-term thinking. People who understand that success isn't about getting ahead fast, it's about building something that lasts. If you find value in this story, please hit that subscribe button right now. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us reach more people who need to hear them. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss a video, because every week we're bringing you real stories about real people facing real challenges and finding their way through with courage, dignity, and intelligence. And if you know someone who needs to hear Yvonne's story, maybe someone is facing a career crisis or someone considering taking shortcuts they'll regret, share this video with them. Sometimes the story someone needs finds them at exactly the right moment. Before you go, I have one more thing to say. To anyone watching this who feels stuck right now, who feels like their career is collapsing, who feels betrayed by someone they trusted, who feels like the world is against them. Remember Yvonne. Remember that she sat in a coffee shop 1 year ago, her reputation shattered, wondering if she'd ever recover. And today, she's not just recovered, she's thriving, she's leading, she's teaching others. Not because she was lucky, not because she had powerful connections, but because she refused to panic, refused to compromise, and refused to give up on what she knew was right. You can do the same. The path won't be fast, it won't be easy. But if you stay true to your values, document everything, prepare instead of panic, and trust that truth eventually surfaces, you will not just survive. You will transform your crisis into your greatest testimony. That's the real lesson here. That's what Yvonne taught us. And that's why her story and yours matters. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay ethical, stay prepared, and never, ever compromise your integrity for anyone. Because in the end, integrity is the only currency that never loses its value.